Calumet Editions, an eclectic publisher of fiction, nonfiction, and poetry, introduced a new business model nearly a decade ago, in which the publisher and author work as equal partners in a joint venture. Their stable of authors have won numerous and prestigious prizes across literary forms. Where traditional publishers fail to see the value in projects, Calumet cooperates with his authors in realizing a book's potential.
And welcome to Writer's Corner. It's not really Writer's Corner now. It's Writer's geographical hop to Florida, where one of our favorite writers has escaped Minnesota for reasons unbeknownst to us, maybe the weather, I'm not sure. But Brian Freeman, who I'm amazed can take a half hour out from writing how many books a year? 4 maybe. To join us. And there he is with his headphones on in Florida. Brian, welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be back with you, Alan, even if it's long distance.
It certainly is a very long distance. And it's been a year now, I guess, that you have escaped what has really been a beautiful summer so far. So shame on you. But let's talk about Brian Freeman and the latest Bourne book, which the Bourne Shadow, which you see there, is just out a few weeks, and Break Every Rule, which is your standalone, and that's out a couple of months, and we can talk about both of them. How have you been? How's Marcia? How's Florida?
All doing great. It's been a terrific move for us. I actually wrote virtually all of both of those books sitting outside on the lanai overlooking the lake, and that's pretty hard to beat. I don't think I would have been doing that in January in Minnesota.
It's a pity on you. What can I say? I also want to give a shout out to Paul Saxton of Egan High School, and Josh Sibley and Kevin Miller of Egan TV that have arranged this. This is a first-time experiment for us. We normally just do 2 writers with me in studio on Writer's Corner, and doing a Zoom gives us a whole new, really, aspect of being able to do things with writers who are not around the corner. So you're part of an experiment, and we're really happy to have you on board. You were about to say something.
No, I think that's great. I mean, if there's one good thing that came out of the pandemic, it's the fact that we can now all use Zoom and connect to places far and wide. I know for me it was actually really good to be able to do sort of book club events, all around the country, even all around the world, and have a chance to sort of personally connect with readers that otherwise I'd just never be able to get to in person. So that's terrific.
Well, for us, this is something new, and we're going to take it in stride. Jonathan Stride, that is.
I was going to say that was a nice little play on words there. I like that.
Are we going to see another Jonathan Stride book?
Well, I hope so. It's one of those things I haven't made a final decision about that yet. I've got 11 books in the Stride series. The most recent was The Zero Night, which came out a couple of years ago. And I always end each Stride novel with sort of an emotional closure, so that if for some reason circumstances prevented me from getting back to Stride's world, that readers would have a full, rich creative experience in the series. And the challenge when you've got a long-running series like Stride, where you've got 11 books out there, is that it's harder to draw in new readers, because there are a lot of readers that no matter how much I tell them that you don't need to start at the beginning, you can really dive anywhere into the series. And I write the books very carefully so that you get a full, rich experience of the characters with each of the novels. There are a lot of folks that if it's a series, they want to start at book 1, and telling people, well, you have to read 11 books before you get to the next one. That's kind of a big ask. So on the other hand, I love Stride. I love Duluth. So we'll see what happens.
I hope to see Stride back, and I will say that your style of making each book almost a standalone has been inspirational for me in terms of I'm now on book 3 of the series that I'm writing, which is probably a trilogy. But in any event, it certainly is helpful, uh, and I use you as part of my inspiration. So for what that's worth. Now with the Bourne Shadow, which is just out, uh, I notice one of the things that you like to do is to leave us wondering, like out of the blue, Johanna became a character in the Bourne Shadow, and at the end, she's still there, but we don't know. Is she going to try to take down Treadstone? Is that going to be the future of Bourne? You probably know, but why don't you share with us a little bit about that?
Well, I mentioned the challenges of a long-running series, and it certainly doesn't get too much more long-running than something like Jason Bourne, that literally goes back at this point 44 years. But of course, when I rebooted the Bourne series and took it over, I took Ludlum's original character and tried to recreate that character authentically, but drop him down into all new settings, modern settings, with an all new cast of characters around him. But even so, every few books in a series, I kind of like to go to ground and start a whole new set of characters and a whole new set of story arcs, because I think, again, it welcomes new readers to the party, and it keeps the series fresh and interesting and spontaneous, because you're getting new people and you've got new challenges for the heroes. So in the Bourne Shadow, that's really kind of a restart. Again, for Bourne, I wrapped up a lot of the story threads of my earlier Bourne books in the Bourne Defiance, which came out last year, and now with the Bourne Shadow, I'm introducing new elements of Bourne's past and new characters that I can stage drama around him. So and as it happens, you will certainly meet folks from the Bourne Shadow again in the next Bourne book, which is already done and is already on the calendar. The Bourne Vendetta is actually coming out in January already, so not too much longer. People have to wait for more Bourne.
There are not too many people who can write 4 really successful novels a year. There's not too many people that can write 4 books a year, let alone very successful books. You are unique in that regard.
Well,
Of
it's
course,
only
I
it's
know that
only it's only 3 this year, so I'm kind of slacking here. So
I understand that Marcia locks you in the closet, lets you out in the morning, you write, and then you go back in the closet. Is that true?
well, yeah, that there could be some truth in that. Yeah. She also says she sleeps with one eye open after reading my book, so you never know. Um, Fortunately, I don't like having to write that quite that many books in a compressed time frame, mostly because I love to savor each book, and once I get the words on the page, I like to be able to spend several weeks really just sort of fiddling with each word in each paragraph and enjoying sort of the flow of the novel over and over again. I'm literally putting the finishing touches on a new standalone mystery right now, right today. In fact, I'm in the middle of the last chapter, but it means that you really have to sort of understand your own process, and you have to sort of understand what you can do in a given day, a given week, a given month, and so I've been doing this long enough. Break Every Rule, which comes out in September, is my 30th novel, that I have a sense of what works for me, and I've built a process that works for me, and that allows me to kind of meet some deadlines that are occasionally a little on the crazy side.
Well, you were a little bit prescient in this one, in Bourne Shadow, in that you got involved in the French election. And Lord knows that the French, who are enjoying the Olympics as we talk, have had enough problems with their electoral process this year. So to be prescient is always good. I notice also, and of course I'm curious, will David Webb, Jonathan Bourne, ever find out his background, his past? Will it all ever come back to him? Perhaps you can clue us in that regard.
Yeah, well, first of all, yeah, I wrote the Bourne Shadow obviously multiple months ago, so I certainly was sort of amused and surprised when all of the French election things started coming into the fore this summer. I was sort of wondering if maybe someone had passed Mr. Macron an advanced copy of the Bourne Shadow, and this is what gave him the idea of calling a snap election. But yeah, it's the thing about Bourne and his memory. I think that's one of the things that makes him such an interesting and enduring character. I mean, he's got this psychological complexity to him, and he's dealing with sort of existential questions of who he is, and what kind of a man is he, and what is his moral identity. And on a less dramatic level, I think those are the things that we all face from day to day. So I think that's what keeps Bourne so connected to readers, and I think that's one of the reasons why he's lasted so long in this genre is just the nature of that psychology. And so will parts of his memory come back? Sure. I mean, I've tried to do that in my first 4 books, where little elements of his past will revisit him. And yet at the same time, I don't see Bourne ever simply getting his entire memory back, because I think then that makes him sort of less interesting as a hero. It sort of takes away what makes him so different as a character in the books. So I think we'll always be dealing with Bourne in memory. In fact, who knows? I might actually find ways to strip away some more of his memory. We'll just see. So,
Well, one of the things that you do very effectively is blend in Treadstone with periodically statements by Treadstone throughout the book, rules that Treadstone has laid down. I wonder now, is Nash gone? Is Monica now the new Treadstone head? You deal in strong women. You have Johanna, you have Vandal, and you had Monica now, who has been a lover and perhaps the new head of Treadstone. Is that where we go from here? Has Nash disappeared, or is he still around?
well, the thing is that I mentioned that with I like to kind of go to ground every few books and introduce some new characters. But what that also does is gives me the opportunity to bring back the occasional character by surprise when you don't see them coming. So until they are bullet riddled on the floor, I think that you can't count any character out, and there's always the chance that they may show up and surprise you.
Now, moving on from Bourne, we have Break Every Rule, which I think is first coming out, right? Is that correct?
September 10th. September 10th is when Break Every Rule
September
comes
10th.
out.
Very interesting book because it deviates somewhat from the psychological thrillers. It's a thriller of sorts, and I think there's a very interesting story about the leading character, Tommy Miller. Why don't you tell us how Tommy Miller became the leading character?
Yeah, well, Break Every Rule, I was looking to build a hero that sort of combined the best qualities of Jason Bourne and Jonathan Stride. I wanted to write both an action thriller and yet a thriller that also had the sort of clues and mysteries that my Stride books have. And so what you have here is Tommy Miller, a man with a lot of secrets and skills in his past, who's sort of in hiding in Florida from his past. And so when his wife and daughter are kidnapped, he naturally assumes that his past is coming back to haunt him. But as he starts trying to sort of follow the clues his wife has left behind, he realizes that she was keeping a lot of secrets of her own, and it kind of becomes a search for redemption for Tommy, as he realizes that it's the secrets that he and his wife have been keeping from each other that have put them both in jeopardy, and it becomes a very emotional thriller along the way as well. So when I was creating the character of Tommy Miller, I actually was inspired by a real life, very good friend of mine who is like Tommy, a retired Army Ranger and a former police detective, and it's been so rewarding for me to have him in my life and get to know him and get to know sort of what is involved in a real hero's life, and the ups and downs of that. And so I was very much inspired by him when I created the character of Tommy Miller, and I hope that comes through and honors him in this book. The other thing is there's a Minnesota connection to Tommy Miller. For several years now, in every book, I have donated a character name to the Minnesota organization Wishes and More, which is a similar organization to Make a Wish. And as part of their annual fundraiser, they do sort of a raffle or auction for to win the honor of having your name as a character in the book. And so I think it was about 2 or 3 years ago, Tommy Miller was the one that won that honor at the Wishes and More auction, and was going to be a character in the book. And so I let them know, well, I could slide Tommy as a supporting character into a Bourne novel, or I'm planning a standalone where I think the name Tommy Miller would be great for the lead character of the novel. So if Tommy is willing to wait a couple of years, he'll be the star of the show. And so Tommy wanted to wait, and here we go. A couple of years later now, we finally have Tommy Miller front and center in Break Every Rule.
And in addition to Tommy and Teresa, they have their daughter Rosalita. Will we see more of Tommy Miller and Teresa down the road?
I don't know. We'll see. I obviously leave it open at the end of Break Every Rule that if I wanted to bring Tommy Miller back, I could do that. I will confess, from a business standpoint, I'm always a little wary of second books in a series, because I think for most authors, they would tell you that second books in a series can be really, really difficult. And you tend to lose a lot of first-time readers along the way, just because people tend to be sort of one and done on books. And when you come back with a second book in the series, it's harder you have to pull more readers in to get them to start with the first book. And a lot of your first-time readers, it's just harder to find them again and say, okay, oh, there's another book featuring the same character. So it's just a little trickier from a marketing standpoint. So we'll see. I love Tommy Miller. I love the character, and there's certainly much more that could be done with him. But I haven't decided yet what we're going to do there.
Well, you just were the subject of a very nice interview with Chris Hewitt of the Star Tribune, who was actually a guest on our program a few months ago, and he did a very interesting Q&A with you, trying to expose a lot of your secrets, but not too many of which came out. But that was very nice. Now, what is it that you're just completing now? You said you're on the last chapter of something.
Yeah, well, as I mentioned, I wrapped up the next Bourne novel, The Bourne Vendetta, which comes out in January, and I'm now finishing up a new psychological mystery for Blackstone called Photograph, and it's sort of more along the lines of a book like The Deep, Deep Snow that I wrote a few years ago. It's a very interesting mystery. Takes place both in Florida and Michigan, and a female first-person narration. I love the character, I love the story, and again, I'm right in the home stretch of that book right now. So I would expect we'd be seeing that out sometime in 2025.
And speaking of characters and Michigan and Minnesota, etc., have you visited every place in France that you described in the Bourne Shadow? And is it your practice always to use places that you have been for accuracy?
I usually do. I often do. Certainly, in this case, in the Bourne Shadow, most of the places in the book I've actually been. The book has sort of the climactic scenes of the book are set out on Holy Island in the UK, which I've been to a couple times. It's one of my favorite places. Just a really dramatic locale. On the other hand, and so certainly when in the Stride novels, I would always be scouting locations up in Duluth, sort of the way a film director would, and that was definitely a part of my process. It changed a little bit during COVID because, of course, as a result of COVID, for practically 2 years, I really didn't have the opportunity to be traveling in order to visit locations that I wanted to use in the book. So I tended to end up using locations that I had visited, even if I couldn't get back to them to find particular areas and be back there again. And so I that's what I've tended to do since then. Partly it's if when you're writing 2 or 3 books a year, boy, I don't have a lot of time to just go off and spend a couple of weeks in France, as much as I might like to, scouting locations. But I do enough research that hopefully I can continue to put readers right there in the middle of the scene and feel it and touch it and taste it and smell it and hear it happening all around them. A good example of that was in my thriller, I Remember You, which came out a couple of years ago. I Remember You, sort of my Michael Crichton-esque sort of thriller. And a lot of that book takes place in Boston. And while I have been to Boston, I haven't spent a lot of time there, but I did a lot of research in putting I Remember You together. And one of the things I really enjoyed was that I had a lot of Boston readers who wrote to me when that book came out and said, "Oh, you just absolutely nailed Boston." And I love to hear that because I think Bostonians tend to be pretty particular about their city. So if I'd made mistakes, they sure would have told me about it.
Google has made life much easier in terms of finding locations and nailing them down. We didn't have that 2 decades ago to the degree that we have today, but that certainly has alleviated that problem to some degree.
Yeah, it definitely helps. I mean, I Google Street View is a great resource, and what I actually do is I actually use Oculus glasses, which are the virtual reality 3D glasses from Facebook, and I'll actually run Google Street View using the 3D technology, so it truly feels like you're right there in the middle of the location, and you can kind of walk your way through the setting. That really does help it come to life.
Well, as I say, Break Every Rule, which is coming out shortly, is a little bit of different style than the psychological thrillers which you have been known for, and the Deep Deep Snow, which won all kinds of awards. Uh, so, how do you move from one to another to another? Which hat do you put on when you get up in the morning?
Yeah, well, that's actually, I think, what helps me kind of stick to a fairly aggressive pace of production is the fact that the books are so different from each other. I think if I were writing a lot of books that were all kind of in the same vein, it would be harder to differentiate them in my mind and harder to kind of separate out the characters and the stories. But the fact that I can pick up a book like The Deep Deep Snow with the very emotional mystery female first person narration and then put that down and pick up a Stride novel, which is kind of a gritty police procedural, and put that down and pick up a Bourne novel, which is very adrenaline and action oriented. I think it's that difference of approach in the books that really makes it fun for me and keeps me creatively inspired because they pull out different sides of me and they allow me to focus on different aspects of my creativity, different kinds of characters, different kinds of stories. So I like that. And honestly, I mean, I look around at thriller writers today and I say, well, I'm pretty proud of where I am because I don't think there are a lot of folks that have the diversity of production that I have. That it's not just a question of writing the same sort of book over and over. I've gone in so many interesting directions that I love the diversity of stories I've been able to tell.
Do you really have any time to read other writers? That's a question that, with all the writing that you do and all the time that you spend on it, uh, other than the fact that you take an occasional cruise, and we both have a favorite singer on a particular cruise ship that we were on at different times, uh, do you spend a lot of time reading?
Yeah, that's been one of the only downsides to breaking through as an author myself is it is a lot harder to both carve out the time and the energy to read. Certainly, I mean, I used to love reading mysteries and thrillers. I love the genre. There's so many great writers in the genre, but when you've been writing suspense all day yourself, it's a little hard to kind of pick up a novel at the end of the day and lose yourself in someone else's thriller, because it starts to feel more like market research and work rather than entertainment. And I look at it and go, oh, no, I like that. I think I would have done that differently. Oh, I see where he's going there. So yeah, I when I read, it tends to be something completely different. It might be history or biography or memoirs. But yeah, it's a little hard to read my own genre, and again, it has nothing to do with the quality of writers in the genre. But inevitably, my own books are so three-dimensional, and I'm so intimately connected to the story and the characters that automatically it just means that somebody else's book is going to feel a little more flat, a little more two-dimensional to me, because I don't. It's simply not in my head in the same way that my own books are.
What about coming back and visiting us in Minnesota? Is that any place on the schedule?
Well, I don't have anything on the schedule, but I'm sure that at some point we will certainly make our way back there, whether it's just to visit friends or to be able to do some book events when a new book comes out. But we spent pretty much our whole adult lives in Minnesota, so I'm confident that the world will take us back there sooner or later.
And we'd love you back on a third Monday of the month for Minnesota Mystery Night. And I can guarantee you that that would be a sellout.
Absolutely.
So we would look forward to that. And other than that, what else is down the road for you?
Yeah, well, as I mentioned, the Putnam folks have been keeping me busy with Bourne, so I've got two more Bourne books to write back to back once I finish Photograph here. So I'll be diving in on a new Bourne novel very shortly here, and then I don't know yet. I don't like to plan too far ahead, because I like to kind of see where the inspiration strikes me and what kind of story feels right next. So I probably toward the end of the year will start sort of wrapping my head around what kind of stories I might want to tell after that, and so we'll see where the inspiration goes.
You might get Bourne involved in politics in the United States in the next one, because it's so confused right now and it's so crazy right now that I think that Bourne and Treadstone could have a feast.
Yeah, well, it's funny. I always joke that the original era in which Bourne emerged was back in the late '70s, early '80s, in the midst of Vietnam and Watergate and all of the conspiracies and distrust in government, and boy, there's certainly been some rich source material for Bourne in the modern era. That has certainly helped my plotting.
Well, I want to wish you well. It's been a really interesting experiment that we've had here, uh, having you with us with a Zoom, and maybe you'll come back after the next Bourne book is out. I think in January you mentioned.
Oh,
Certainly, we,
you think I'm coming back there in January, Alan? I'm going to disabuse you of that notion right now.
no, no, no. Come back on Zoom in January
There we go. That
while you're
okay.
sitting out by while you're
That
sitting out by the lanai, and send our regards to the author's wife,
I will do it.
Marcia, uh, who is a personality in her own right. And it's been a real pleasure with Brian Freeman joining us again from his escape really route in Florida. Uh, Brian, thank you. Thank you for the experiment, and we look forward to more Bourne and more Brian.
Thank you so much, Alan. Great to connect with you again.
Terrific.